Welcome to our seventh, and I think this one's officially the biggest Luminary event we've had for anybody that has been to all the previous ones. Thank you. So we're really excited to have John here this evening. Lots of people are interested in hearing what he has to say for obvious reasons. I mean, his story generally is fascinating, but what's really cool is that I'm pretty sure his story is the epicenter of all of the various themes that our event has here this evening. So to begin with, a big piece of what we do is trying to really celebrate and illustrate the flexibility and adaptability of the CPA skill set. And so check mark on that one. And this is also a part of our Fin in Tech initiative, which is all about bringing CPAs and the tech world closer together. So another big check mark on that one. For anybody that doesn't or isn't familiar with our Fin in Tech initiative, I'll very quickly go over what it is. As I said, it's all about bringing the CPA and tech world closer together. There's so much value CPAs can add to young startups, and CPAs want to get involved. So we're really trying to find the best ways for that to happen. And we do that through kind of three pillars, let's say, of the Fin in Tech initiative. The first are events like these, where we bring people like John out to inspire the rest of us to get more involved in the technology and innovation ecosystem. The second are educational events, which are kind of like startup boot camps for CPAs. For all of you that have been to our introductory course, we have actually planned the next one now. It's all about kind of how to work within a technology company and work with technology developers, but really understanding the technology component of that. As CPAs, we don't learn any of that. And what's really neat is that the guy teaching it is not only the director of engineering at Wealthsimple, but he's also a CPA. So he's a really unique guy. It's a really cool one. And the last piece of Fin in Tech is the placement program, which is all about matching any of you with early stage companies who need your help and support. And it's kind of a free volunteer part-time thing that you can do. And really, it's a great way to get your feet wet in the startup space if you don't want to have to quit your job to find out if it's right for you. So, given all of that, I think John has kind of been like laying the groundwork for all of Fin in Tech for the past 20 years. So thank you for that one. I have noticed that, and perhaps it's a big coincidence, but the conspicuous number of CPAs on John's team is available and visible to all. Just beyond that, I want to have some of the organizations that made this evening possible come up and say a few words, and then we'll get going. So to begin with, I'm kind of looking out, there he is over there. We're going to hear from Xero. So Xero has the absolute best cloud accounting software out there, especially for startups. And the Xero team has been a huge supporter of Fin in Tech from day one. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Will Buckley, Director of Xero Canada.
Excellent. Cheers, appreciate it. Thank you. As Michael said, so Xero is online accounting software. We're market leaders in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. We're very passionate and excited about the Commonwealth countries, which is why we're here in Canada. So I'm very excited to have been able to travel across the world. As you can probably tell, I'm not Canadian originally, but your immigration policy is so good I couldn't resist. So we found Luminary a few months ago, and we were instantly drawn to their enthusiasm for making CPAs have a voice here in Canada. We know from the 1.4 million small business customers that use Xero around the world how impactful it is for CPAs to get involved with startups and small business owners. So 2 data points I'd love to share with everyone. When a CPA connects with a startup in their first year, that startup's likelihood of still being around after 5 years increases from 51% to 85%. And that same startup will grow their net profit at 23% faster than what its peers will. So we absolutely believe that CPAs can play a really critical role in startup success, which is why we're so lucky to have found Michael and Adam and the team at Luminary. So thank you very much for allowing Xero to be part of this event. We love it, and I'm sure you will too. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And second is an organization I think everybody here will know, CPA Ontario. We all have a huge connection with it. We know a lot about what they do, but I think something that a lot of us don't know is the strides that they're taking to push our designation forward and for us to have continued value and purpose as the economy changes. So on that, I'd like to ask Craig Smith. I'm looking around for Craig. Oh, there he is. Who is he's the Director of Member Services at CPA Ontario, to say a couple words on that.
Michael. So I'll be brief because I know we want to see John. So great to be here. What a great event it's going to be. It's great to have such a leader in the innovation space here. And as Michael said, innovation is increasingly important to us at CPA Ontario. We've spent a lot of time looking at disruptive technologies, understanding that's going to have a pretty profound effect and impact on the profession. What I love about Fin and Tech is rather than saying, hey, how are we going to survive the disruptive technology wave, it's more like how are we going to lead it? How are we going to own this space? How are we going to be the instrumental group that drives the startups and scale-ups of the future? So great overall campaign, as well as all of the other luminary events that we participate in. I would just say two things from CPA Ontario's perspective. From an innovation perspective, we're spending a lot of time on podcasts these days. So we have a series called Future Forward Podcast. I encourage you as CPAs to check it out because it's very easy PD to kind of take it on while you're mobile. And we a lot of our topics in the Future Forward series are around disruptive technologies. So please have a look when you get a chance. The only other thing I would say is, Michael, maybe people may not know, is part of our Emerging Leaders Advisory. So we have an advisory of leading thought leaders under 34 within the CPA profession in Ontario. And they've been giving us great guidance and advice in terms of how to reach out, how to activate that younger group, which of course is often at the sort of the cutting edge of the technology in innovation space as well. So it's been a great relationship. Part of that, one of the aspects of that particular group is an Emerging Leaders Award, which we're starting to offer. So there's an award which is going to be given out at the end of July, and it's up to all of you to nominate young CPAs who are doing great things, whether they're innovative, whether they are making a big impact in the community. It's quite an open-ended criteria, and we love to recognize some of the great work that's going on, probably in this room, as well as with your colleagues across Ontario. So I encourage you to check that out as well. So no further ado, I will hand it back to Michael and enjoy the evening.
Thanks so much, Greg. So finally, we just want to ask our friends at ConnectCPA, Mike Pinkus, to come up and say a couple of words. ConnectCPA is a cloud accounting firm. They're really shaking up the way that traditional public accounting is done. So if you haven't heard about them, check them out. I'll give the plug, connectcpa.ca.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And I know you all want to hear John, and we're big fans of what OMERS is doing, and so I'll be very brief and be very quick. I'm one of the co-founders of ConnectCPA. We're a cloud-based chartered accounting firm, and what we do is we specialize in streamlining the accounting process for small and medium-sized businesses to help them get greater visibility over their financial numbers. And really, we work with a lot of growing companies to help them understand their metrics further using KPIs. And like I said, we're a technology specialist, we're a Xero Platinum partner, and we use these tech tools to really help businesses grow and become more profitable. So if you want to learn more, if you're looking for a career change, you want to check out our career page, please go to connectcpa.ca. And if you're working at a startup and you want to learn more about us, add me on LinkedIn, go to our website, reach out. Anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, everybody. And now let's get rolling. So just before I start asking John a few questions, I'll give him a little bit of an intro. So first of all, he is a native Torontonian. So give your hands up for that one. Yeah. John went to Xero Business School. I'm sure many of you did the same. And again, like many of us, he started his career in audit at a firm called Arthur Andersen, which, for those of you who are younger than some of us here, they were actually the fifth big five firm when there were five. Anyways, look it up. So he started at Arthur Andersen in audit, Very quickly, he actually decided to start building their tech practice, which we're going to talk a little bit about, and made his way to partner at Arthur Andersen. In 2002, he moved over to Deloitte, also leading their technology practice and eventually becoming a member of the board at Deloitte. And then in 2011, he made the move over to OMERS as the CEO of their new venture arm, which is where he remains today. So something that is really interesting is that post-graduation, John has only actually worked for 3 companies, which is really rare in the current business environment, and I thought it was worth pointing out. And despite that, he has been involved with so many other organizations that I will not name all of them. It would really make your head spin. So I'm going to very briefly rip out a list of some of the organizations that he's been a part of, and we'll just get going after that. So John is or has been a board member at Hootsuite, Desire to Learn, Ether Capital, the David Suzuki Foundation, Canadian Council of Innovators, who actually sit in our office as well, Ontario Centres of Excellence, the ROM, the Next Big Thing Foundation, and our home right here at 111. So again, thank you. I'm going to be saying thank you a lot because, I mean, John really has helped build this ecosystem that Adam and I at Luminary have taken advantage of. So without any further ado, why don't we get going?
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, again, thanks so much for being here. And I think the first thing that was on my mind when I heard your story is at 25 or 26 years old, you're at the firm and you decide you want to build out the tech practice there. And
Yes.
you were what, like a senior or a manager at the time?
I would have been, so I was there for 4 years, so I was just promoted to manager, yes.
Okay, so a first year manager, and he decides to go and build a whole practice at this massive firm. So I guess the question is, like, how do you put yourself in a position to be able to go and build, a new piece of the practice? And yeah, just take us through a little bit of that story.
Yeah, so just to give you some context, and again, I am significantly older than most of you in here, so you may have to turn back into your history books. But one of the worst recessions that we've had over the last 30-ish years was actually the 1990-92 recession. And during that time, I would have been in Arthur Andersen for a couple of years, and I made my move from audit, and I really wanted to be a tax guy. And one of the reasons was I wanted to engineer some of the activities or transactions as opposed to recording them after the fact, except one problem. Recession hits, there's no transactions, and I'm getting quite bored. And one of the things that was bugging me was when companies were making decisions, I didn't understand how and why they were making business decisions. So I really wanted to spend time with the CEOs of these companies. But as a 25-year-old, they really didn't want to spend any time with me, which was absolutely understandable. And so I was trying to figure out, is there an industry that I could actually go to and learn the business and then use my very little tax skills at the time as an opportunity or as a wedge in, but really understanding more about the business. And I went through all the various businesses, and there was one business that not one of the partners cared about, and it was a really new business, which at the time we called it the high-tech business. And because every other partner was involved in financial services, manufacturing, etc., I said, hey, can I do the high-tech one? And the real reason in my mind was the CEOs were not that much older than I, and they wouldn't laugh at me if I tried to contact them. So I thought the age gap was tighter. And number two, the partners said, yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out and do whatever you like, because they couldn't care about the business and no one cared. And the first 2 clients I got were 2 very small companies at the time. It was Microsoft and Oracle. And those were 2 good ones to start off with.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it's so amazing that you look back at that time. High tech, that's nothing. But something that's really interesting that comes out of what you're saying, and something I'll mix it with something that you said to me, which I found really, really fascinating, was that you didn't even, when you got to Deloitte, you didn't even put tax on your business card.
Right.
And I actually just thought of this now. In my entire introduction of you, I don't think I said the word tax.
No.
And I think that's really, really interesting as I mean, you are still a tax professional in a lot of ways. You have that skill set and that background. So why is it, how is it that you're a CPA, you're a tax accountant, but you don't actually talk about that all too much, but you still use those skills?
Well, first of all, some people would be shocked to know that I was a tax practitioner, to be completely honest. But you know, the interesting thing on the tax practitioner side was, you know, before that, I think I told you I wanted to be a lawyer, and the cool thing on the tax side is that you learn the Tax Act. But really, what I wanted to do was, and this is where I spent my time. I was an international tax guy. And I spent a lot of time on mergers, acquisitions, IPO, transactional related work. Mm-hmm. And the tax side was the one area, at least at the time, where you can actually do that stuff. But what actually happened was very quickly, and you know, this is one of the things, I don't know if, is anybody here from a CPA firm right now?
Sure,
is there a lot?
There's gotta be.
Okay.
Hands high. There we go. All right,
okay.
I see them poking
So I will tell you things that drove me absolutely nuts. Okay? And everyone who was on my teams had to operate this way as well, because again, it drove me nuts. But I'll use the tax analogy, but I'll also use the audit practice as well, where So now by this time, I've built or building still the technology practice. And what that really means is it's an industry practice. So servicing technology, media, and telecom companies and providing all services. Mm-hmm. And what drove me nuts from a tax perspective is that a number of people were trained to deliver tax services, and when they would hit a business issue, they would say, well, hold on, that's a business issue, not a tax issue. And that was the worst possible thing that you could say in front of me, because the next thing is, learn the bloody business. And what happened is that every single person, at least at the time, first Arthur Andersen and then Deloitte, I trained them on understanding business first and understanding the decisions of business. And if anybody ever says to you, hold on, wait a minute, like, you don't need to know that. That's complete crap. You need to understand how business works, how they're making money, because then when you're going to deliver your services, the ideas that you come up with are so superior and very, very tailored. One of the things that people were doing, at least at the time that I was there, it was always a hammer looking for a nail, as opposed to saying, okay, let me understand your full business, tell me where your issues are, I do not care it's tax or not, tell me everything. And they might tell me 10 or 15 issues, of which 3 of them, I'd say, hey, you know what, I could solve that problem. By the way, your other 12 issues, there's a bunch of other folks in the organization who can solve those. And what started to happen is, by virtue of taking that mindset, it didn't matter whether I was actually a tax person. It didn't matter to the client that that's what my specialty was, because what they thought of me as was a person who was delivering solutions from an organization to them. And I got to tell you, the greatest compliment you could say to me is, if I was dealing with the CEO of a company, typically they thought I was in the consulting, in the Deloitte consulting. If I was dealing with the audit, they thought I was an auditor, and if I was dealing with a tax matter, they had no idea, but they just simply assumed. So I took this off my card, and it just said John Ruffolo, partner. And the irony was, I got in a whole bunch of crap on that, saying, well, you can't do that. you got to fill it in, and I refused to do that. And it was one of the best flexible things you can do.
So it's great, yeah, honestly. Even if the internal process was getting at you at that point. But no, I think that it's a really important story because where I think I'd like to go next is something that a lot of us feel for anybody who has tried to either shift or pivot out of traditional accounting work, or even make a move within, what you do, but to different industries or things like that. I think we are very easily pigeonholed as a designation, as a profession. I know I dealt with this a lot. I can tell you the CEO that I worked for at the last company that I was at, that was a startup company, literally refused to call me anything but a CFO, even though maybe 10% of what I was doing was finance. And so, I know that you got a lot of flack when you were named the CEO of OMERS Ventures, or what's that accountant doing, leading that venture firm. And so I guess, I would love to hear a little bit more about that story and how you overcame that generalization that I think hurts us in a lot of ways. Like, yeah, we're good at numbers, but we're a lot more than that.
Right. Yeah, so taking the clock back a little bit, so, you're saying about it, I've worked for 3 employers. You could argue it was 2 because Arthur Andersen was hit with the whole Enron fiasco, and then we merged it with Deloitte. So in fact, it was really a continuation.
There you go.
So it was 2. When I went over to Deloitte, what the great thing was I was able to scale up the practice very significantly, and then took over the global leadership role for Deloitte in that industry. What I decided to do, and it ended up being the right thing for me, but because I was so focused in understanding business, and it didn't matter which service I was ultimately delivering, I started really sharpening that skill set. And really what I wanted to do was really be the key advisor to the CEOs in the technology community. So I was the key advisor to Rogers, to BlackBerry, to OpenText, at least from a Canadian perspective, all of them there. And what that really enabled me to do is to really look at a multitude of problems. And right from those large companies to virtually every major startup in Toronto or across Canada, and the venture capital community. So the approach that I took was to look at the life cycle of a business and look at the ecosystem around it. So when you look at what I do today, if we say, what kind of an investor are you at OMERS? We are life cycle investors. Actually took the exact same approach that I took in the CPA firm and brought it out to the market. One of the unique opportunities that you have is you have this massive advantage where you can actually identify the needs of an entrepreneur or a large company CEO or a venture capitalist. So I was able to see the pros and cons on both sides. And when and what happened in 2010, OMERS had decided by that time to get completely out of the venture capital asset class, but they wanted to get the underlying access to the innovation that was going on. They did contact me back in 2010 as an advisor again to say, if you were going to do this, how would you actually structure this sort of a business? And what I didn't realize, there was a sneaky way to actually say, come over and do the business. And one of the reasons why they selected me to do this was back in 2008, and it was kind of actually a selfish thing. Again, if you go back in the clock, 2000, 2001 was the peak of the whole .com era, and it crashed with such a massive thud. By around 2005, it hit the bottom, and it stayed at the bottom, and it was a horrible time. And here is my business in Canada. Although we were the dominant advisor in the space, it became a market share grab. The actual market didn't grow. In fact, the market was contracting. And so all of our new business was just stealing it from someone else. And it's a really hard way to do business. So starting around 2005, I became very active from a political perspective and really advising the federal, provincial, and local governments on what we need to do to re-stimulate the whole sector. And the biggest issue of the time was the lack of access to capital. So I spent the next 3 years driving that hard, and my number one attack was the pension funds. And I poked them hard, I poked them publicly, I poked the banks too, but I went after the pension funds. So what actually happened is when the CEO of OMERS asked me, could I come and build this? I said, no, I'm happy to advise you, but like I'm on the board of Deloitte, I was a candidate to be the next CEO, everything was good there. And he just said, no, he goes, you have been poking us. You've been poking us publicly, and you think you're so fucking smart? You go do it. And I just said, hey, I'm an advisor. I just advise. I don't actually do. That's how I ended up at OMERS.
That's amazing. So everybody out there, for the next job that you want, make sure to piss the heck out of everybody at that company.
Great stuff.
And eventually they'll offer you a job. No, that's really interesting. And I know that you told me when we spoke that the current CEO of OMERS at that time was also a CPA, Michael Nobrega.
Right.
He was a big part of allowing you kind of, I think the way that you said it was the airspace to be able to really get the opportunity to prove that you could actually, go in there and to show them what they were doing wrong. So I guess, could you speak a little bit, for all of us out there that want to make this kind of a move, but are hitting the wall in terms of people saying, oh, well, you're an accountant, you can't do this, you can't write, you can't be a marketer, whatever that is. Just any suggestions for people out there about how to present themselves to be able to break that mold?
Sure. Well, I'll start off with a story, and then I'll come back to it. So the individual who had hired me, he was CEO of OMERS at the time. His name is Michael Nobrega, and he was a very senior partner at Arthur Andersen when I was a summer student. And I temporarily went in the tax practice, and that's when I met him. But we kind of kept in touch throughout the years. And when I joined, I knew a number of the folks there, and a number of them were CPAs. And I said, hey, Michael, I found it kind of odd. There's so many CPAs here. Why have you hired so many? And he said, well, it's pretty simple, John. After working for at least 10 years at a CPA firm, they rip the ego out of your head, and then you're ready to work. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting strategy. But I will tell you, I've continued in on that, and it's because the wealth of talent that we get, and I don't look to see, are you an auditor or a tax person or a consulting folk? It really is looking at the competencies of adaptability, intellectual curiosity, determination, passion for what you do. Those were the skill sets, and I would tell you on the CPA front, those come in abundance, and we continue to pluck many of them, and then we train you on the actual technical competency. Yeah. The technical competency, and I think this is a mistake in the schools too, that can be trained all the time, but if you don't have those underlying key characteristics, then you will fail, at least in our organization.
Yeah, I really agree with that. One of the things that Adam and I talk about all the time is that probably, from what we've seen, one of the biggest success indicators in somebody being able to be effective in a startup is not having an ego. If you're going to sit there and say, well, I don't do that kind of work, it's like, well, then, get the heck out of the startup because you shouldn't be here. So, I mean, it's just, to me, all of what John's saying is really reinforcement of why CPA should be more involved in the tech space. So thank you for that. I want to now actually hop over to something we do that's a little bit fun in the middle of these sessions. We call it the lightning round.
Okay.
So we have a couple of quick questions that
Okay.
should be one word, one phrase answers
Okay,
for you.
got it.
Yeah, if you're ready, then we can
ready?
get going.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. So back by popular demand is this first question, which I just may ask every time now, which is what accounting buzzword best represents your personality?
Accounting buzzword, huh? Oh, man. I've never been asked that question.
Maybe you need to start with a softball first.
Yeah, start with a softball. I'll come back to that question.
All right, think about it.
Yeah,
This one should be easy. This one should be easy. What's your favorite TV show that's at least a decade old?
Seinfeld.
Seinfeld. There you go. Okay, and you can circle back and answer.
Yeah,
the personality, whatever you feel.
yeah.
You're good. We're gonna be in 20 minutes from now. He's gonna be like,
Okay.
got it.
Yeah.
So, what's your guilty non-digital pleasure? So, like the thing that you still do the same way you did it 30 years ago before there became some
Oh my
electronic
God,
version of it.
lots of things here. Well, I mean, a guilty pleasure though. Well, I carry a notebook still. But the irony is I carry the notebook, and I started the notebook in January of 2011, and I'm still halfway through the notebook. And so it's kind of like, oh yeah, he's prepared to take notes, but I actually hate taking notes, so I don't actually take any notes. So that's part of the guilty pleasure, and I'm kind of nervous that someone's going to catch me one time and say, I actually happened to look at it a week ago, and I date it when I'm having a meeting. Well, the last date is about a year ago, yet I bring this thing every single day. So.
Okay, so make note if you are having a meeting with John, if he's writing something down in his notebook, that's a bad thing. It's doodling or something.
Exactly.
If you could live outside of Toronto for a year, where would it be? Anywhere in the world?
Rome.
Rome.
Favorite place in the world, and I named my daughter Rome. As well too. So
is it history? Are you a history buff or just?
Well, I'm Italian, but it's just my favorite place in the world. So I go there every single year. I was just there on the weekend, or across from it this past weekend. But,
cool.
Yeah.
So we are going to do actually a special edition for the end part of this, which is the VC edition of the lightning round.
Okay.
So we're going to hop right into it because I think a lot of people want to hear what some of your VC side. What's the best startup name you've ever heard, regardless of whether the company did any good?
Oh, I'll tell you the best startup. I can't remember what his exact name was, but it was the best story. Do we have any Italians in the crowd here? Okay. Do you know what arancini is? Rice balls.
Yeah.
Okay. A guy wanted to invest in rice balls. And he was watching television, and I think I was on some BNN or something, and he saw the television, and he tracked me down, and he said, I have this great idea on how to make rice balls, and he wants to do a full distribution in restaurants and grocery stores. And he said, we have the best rice balls in the city. And he said something, and I said, are you the guy on Danforth? Was it Danforth and Coxwell? And he said, yeah, do you know, those are the best rice balls in the city. I go, my God, I love those rice balls of all the guys. And we went through a whole thing. At the end of the day, I couldn't tell him that I couldn't invest in rice balls, but I went there. I bought a bunch of rice balls, but...
So it's not a massively scalable SaaS business?
No.
Who would have thought, but great. So just one more here. two more here. What industry are you most most bullish on in Canada from a tech startup perspective?
Like what segment?
Yeah, what segment?
I would say, I mean, there's a few sectors that we're spending a lot of our time on. I mean, there's the obvious one on the blockchain, for example, we're spending a lot of time on. But I'll tell you one that no one was spending, or very, very few that I'm aware of were spending their time, and even my own team started saying, okay, John, you're getting a little too dramatic. And it was around data sovereignty and really owning your data. And I was really getting upset on where we were going as a society, particularly from a mobile experience perspective, and how we were losing control of our identity and how it was shifting off of the mobile or the virtual world into the real world. So about a year ago, I said to the team, okay, this is a new theme that I've been watching for 7 years, and I think things are going to get really, really bad. And lo and behold, it blew up a few months ago with Facebook, Google. Yeah. I don't get that very often on how we nailed one. But what I think is going to happen, and we're going to announce our first investment in this area in a company that I've been following for 7 years. Wow. And for the first 6, didn't think the timing was right. And then about 8 months ago or so, one of my good friends, who I think is the best VC in the world, he's based in New York, was the only other investor in it. And I said, you made this investment in 2011, and I really wasn't sure what you were doing, and I would love to come in. Can you introduce me to the company? And the company's making a fair bit of money, and at the end of the day, I explained to the CEO what the thesis was around here. So we just closed this deal. We're going to be announcing in a couple of weeks. But I really believe that you do not have to give up your security, your privacy, et cetera, in exchange for anonymity. I think you can do both, and you can have a business model, and I think the world's going to change on this basis. And Canada is very, very well poised. If you're in the United States, very difficult to invest in those businesses because there's a lot of big companies who don't like you saying that sort of stuff, and I just don't care. And when we announce this, I know that people will be looking really hard and wondering, what the heck are we doing?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it almost covers the next question I had. So why don't we just hop back into your story, because I know there's lots of things I'd like to ask you, and we only have so much of your time. No, I don't know. I don't put them away. And if you ever come up with that accounting buzzword, I'm going to keep poking you about it. So, when you launched, or I should say when you started at OMERS, you had a fund of about $180 million.
Yep.
And you were actually concerned that you wouldn't be able to deploy all of that capital in Canada. Now you're at $800 million, and from everything that I see, that's just rising. What has changed in that 7 years?
Yeah, no, it's really remarkable. So again, a little bit of context. When I launched the fund, there was no other venture capital funds of any size in the entire country. And when we announced $180 million, it was like, oh my God, that's huge, et cetera. And I sort of figured that I was going to have difficulty deploying that full $180 million. And as it turned out, we deployed it in about a year and a half. And $800 million later, there's just still more room available in this country. And well, what's happened is, when I was growing up, success was really measured whether you were a professional, whether it was an accountant, lawyer, banker, engineer. It's fascinating now. Entrepreneurialism has really moved up in terms of people's eyes. In fact, I remember again when I was at Schulich and we were in 4th year, and it was very heavily CPA weighted, And we had the folks kind of around the table and going, okay, so what do you think you're going to be? And there was a whole bunch of accountants. And there was one guy, I remember this, he said he wanted to be an entrepreneur. And we were like, yeah, he need to, because he can't get a job anywhere. And that was honestly the idea. And now how it's flipped. So the number of opportunities. And now I'm in the middle of launching, and this is going to be a hard thing to do, but again, it would be the only time, it certainly has ever been done in Canada, but globally. I'm building OMERS Ventures in Europe and in Asia, and we will have Canada's only ever and one of the world's only truly global venture firms around the world, and it will deploy about $2 billion. And so, and that was a 10-year journey, but we 10x'd the 180 to $2 billion in 10 years, which tells you the world has moved and changed, and this is not going away.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been involved in this space for 5 years, and by the time I got in, you were already, the kind of top of the pyramid here in Canada. But it's really great to see that you're taking that and pushing it globally, because again, it's an area that Canada has a lot to add, I think.
And bringing the profits back here.
Yeah, right? There we go. Clap for that one. That was a real clap. But something you actually just said there triggered something. I was watching an old video of you in a non-creepy way. I was researching for tonight, and something that you said really resonated with me, and I think it really comes out of it's interesting how this dynamic has changed, but that. You said the press makes entrepreneurship too sexy, too easy, too glamorous. And I think this is something that Adam and I have spoken about a lot internally, and not that we have any solutions there, but I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that topic and why you think it's a problem, because we do ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually just an article on it again today. It goes back to the best advice that I got when I first started being a VC, and I made a comment saying that, I'm an investor. And he said, you are not a fund investor. You are a fund returner. So whatever I put in, I'm expecting, or my investors expect, at least $3 to come for every dollar they put in. And when you start to run the math, it starts to run some pretty high numbers. The same thing with the entrepreneur when they're raising a big financing. It's not a point of celebration, because for me, if it's early stage, I want your return 10 times back to me, or if it's late stage, 3 times. And so now the work starts, and that's not where the glamour is. The glamour is if there's an exit and you've made people lots of money in return, celebrate like crazy. And so, being an entrepreneur, and you know, is very lonely. It's long hours. You're dealing with the minutia. You're always stressing. You're stressing about where the next dollars are coming from. You're stressing about the employees that you have on staff and making sure that you're thinking about their lives, etc. And the most time that I spend with the entrepreneurs that we invest in is literally on the psychological front. Always asking them, how are you feeling? If they're married, how's the marriage going? I need happy people. And when things get bad is the best time. This is where a true VC comes in. Not when things are good. That's really easy. But I've been there where I've just seen the depths of what some of the entrepreneurs go through. And the fact that some of these folks tout a great fundraise and then realize that the business is not moving, and now being ashamed or embarrassed about it. So I do think entrepreneurship is one of the hardest, greatest things that you can do. It really drives the value in the ecosystem, and that's why I love the role that I play. Is that I play a small little part in giving them a little bit of fuel but to support them in achieving their ultimate objectives.
Oh, that's great, thanks. I mean, it's a lot of what you just said really obviously is very personally felt by me, and I think you see it all the time where you hear people talking about a successful startup. Well, why are they successful? Oh, they raised $80 million. It's like, okay, well, they just actually lost part of their company. They sold, not lost, they sold part of their company. And I think there is a really interesting kind of discussion around that, and to what you said, the win is the exit, not the fundraise. So yeah, no, thank you for that. Just to look at time here. This one, I actually want to move away for a minute from the VC side of your life, because another thing that you said when we were chatting really struck a chord with me. You were talking about your role as the vice chair and the board member at the David Suzuki Foundation. And you said you're right and he's left, but you needed humanity. And you know, these are really polarizing times right now, so I really loved that sentiment of, you know, I think a lot of people have lost that that sense of like you actually need both to balance and land somewhere in the center. So do you have any suggestions for all of us who are trying to build bridges rather than be part of that polarization?
Yeah, I mean, if you ask the question, you know, why am I even involved on that? And I do spend a lot of time on the charitable or not-for-profit front. It really, again, goes back to the adaptability question and really always understanding both sides. Now, I believe in prosperity, and a lot what I do every day is about prosperity, but without a sustainable prosperity, I don't think you have anything, because what you're really doing is that you're just mortgaging the future for your kids. And it wasn't until I had a child and he was about a year old, it really started hitting. In fact, the story around David was an interesting one. So our first meeting, we actually had a fight. At least I did, and I was a jackass. And but he doesn't remember we had a fight, which I thought funny. So I built, back in, I think it was 2005, at the time was the first clean tech practice that was ever in a consulting firm. It was at Deloitte. And again, no one knew what the hell I was doing on there, and neither did I, to be completely honest, but it didn't matter, but it sounded pretty cool. And I thought, what would be really cool is, and I had my whole team across Canada, we were out in Niagara Falls, and I had everyone cycle to Niagara Falls too, by the way, which was a mistake in hindsight. But, so I just, I really want to make a big splash, and we need to have a great keynote, and somebody said, how about David Suzuki? And I said, great. So we paid for him as a speaker. He came there, and I was so excited, and after he was going to do his speech, I had an opportunity to sit with him for about 30 minutes or so. And during his speech, he basically said that technology is bullshit. And I'm like, Jesus, I just launched the clean tech practice, and David Suzuki just basically shit on the practice. So afterwards, we go back, and I just said, hey, Suzuki, what was that? And he just said, well, what do you mean? And I just said, you said technology is bad, and he said, yeah, you know, all you guys think that you can just pollute all you want, impact the environment, and then technology, the scientists are going to come and solve the problem, so you can just carry on with your lousy behavior. And then things got worse, because then I started pointing at him saying, you know what your problem is?
Oh, that's where it
And
gets good.
then it went down. And then about 20 minutes later, I realized, what am I doing? And the meeting was cut short. My wife calls me up and she says, hey, how did the meeting go with David Suzuki? And I go, not so well. And she's like, yeah, what did you do? And I go, I started yelling at him. And she goes, you yelled at David Suzuki, you bloody asshole. And I go, I know, I felt terrible. I felt terrible for a couple of weeks. And lo and behold, David writes me a really long 4-page letter, which I still have. And he's apologizing profusely. And I'm like, you're apologizing, I'm so sorry. And what he basically said is, I know I need to understand business in order to educate business on how to move forward in the environment. And he asked me, could I help him? And this was back in 2006, or actually 2005, I guess. And now 12 years later, I'm his vice chairman. And it is fascinating when we're sitting together and I will forget some of the humanity of things that we do, and he will forget sometimes that he's going so extreme that people turn off, and then we sort of meet in the middle and package up the idea, and I encourage that on everything we do. It's the same thing with technology. In technology, and it drives me kind of nuts too, the positive side is, the reason why I love this business is every day you see the future. Like, what other job can you see the future every day?
Yeah.
Every investment I make is a double-edged sword, every one. So everything I do actually has a really bad side. So if you ever watch Black Mirror, it's that exact same thing. It's the other side of technology. Hey, isn't a drone cool for your pizza? Oh yeah, and by the way, it's killing thousands and thousands of people. It's the same thing. We just talked about the data sovereignty issue. It was really cool until you flip over. So it's the same thing in all of these not-for-profits. Always look on the other side to kind of keep you balanced and in check.
I think that's a great sentiment that we should all kind of take away from here is finding that balance. Well, thank you for that. We have time for just one more question, and then we'll go to a question from the audience. Oh yeah.
Why'd you have to say that? I just trying
The
to.
accounting buzzword best represents your personality.
And I'm not even a CPA. I want to know.
I was still stumped on that one. I can't remember the buzzwords in on the accounting.
Appreciate.
Depreciation. I'm an old guy. I've been depreciated.
Okay, well, we'll give you, another little bit to think. So the last question I want to ask is actually, when we originally spoke, or when we spoke last week, I asked you if there were any other interesting stories, and the way that you answered me was really pretty phenomenal. You said, well, do you even know why I took your call? And I said, no, I don't. And I just thought that the story you told there was so fantastic. And what I'm going to ask, and just before, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask you, because so many people asked us, how do we get John Ruffolo out to this event? And I'm going to ask you to tell people the best way to find and get in touch with a guy like you, assuming the audience promises that you are going to use it on somebody else, and not John Ruffolo. Are we all in agreement here? Yeah, okay. I see some nodding heads. I don't see a lot of nodding heads over there. But if you're okay with that, what is the best way to get in touch with somebody who is, difficult to get a hold of, who's a busy person that has a lot going on?
Reach out. I mean, the number of people who don't, literally, I just had a tweet a little earlier, and this young woman who has some startup, which was a little evasive on the tweet, and she actually asked that question, and I just said, how do I get a hold of you? And I just said, send me a message and I'll reply. And she said, oh, great. Should I go to, I think, info@omersventures.com? And I said, no. I gave my email address on there.
Yeah.
And I think she was stunned that I gave her the email address. And there are a lot of assholes out there that think they're too busy, and I don't agree with it. In fact, anyone who works with me will tell you I kind of have this 24-hour rule. You have to get back to people and just be respectful. You may not be able to address whatever they're dealing with, but just acknowledge their existence. But it was a story that I think you're referring to, going back again when I was 25, so trying to build the technology practice. And I was working on a tax transaction, and there was this lawyer who was working on our side that I just thought was a really, really sharp person. He was about 20 years older than me. And we chatted very briefly, and I find out he is the king of tech. He's on the boards of tech companies, et cetera. And I thought this guy was legendary. And so I called him and left a message saying that I would just love to spend a little bit of time with you to pick your brain, and frankly, how do I build a practice, and just go out for a cup of coffee. So he doesn't respond back to me, but a month later, I get a message back. And I answer the phone, and it's him. And he says, "Hey, John, I sincerely apologize. I've taken a month to call you back." And here I am, going, are you kidding me? You called me back. I was thrilled out of my mind because I don't, if people don't call back, that's okay. And I was thrilled that he did. And he said, no, that was a really shitty thing to do. I'm going to take you for lunch instead. And I thought, well, what a nice guy. Takes me for lunch, and we find out we actually grew up in a similar neighborhood, and in fact started hitting it off. And what I did next was, and again, he's looking at me like I am, he probably felt more bad, the fact that he didn't reply back, but he didn't think anything would come of it. So for the next, 6 months, every opportunity for legal services, it didn't matter how little it was, I forwarded it to him. And then the types of projects started getting a little bit bigger, but still relatively modest, but it was constant. And then I knew he'd feel bad on that, and then he flips me one back. But his is much bigger. And this went on really over the course of the next 3 years, and lo and behold, 1995, boom, the internet was born, and now I have millions and millions of fees coming in and needing legal help. And to this day, I am the largest source of revenue that this lawyer, who's a very, very well-known lawyer in Toronto, has ever generated, and he does all of OMERS deals to this day. And so here's a snotty-nosed little punk, and he didn't know who I was, and now I've accounted for tens of millions of dollars of revenues coming to him. So from that story, anyone who sends me a message, and the rule is you get the first meeting for free. Now, it may not be as timely as you would like, but you get the first meeting for free. The second meeting, you really got to prove your ROI for the second meeting. And I've committed to this. It drives my assistant crazy because there's just a flood of it. But to this day, the number of young kids in particular who will send me a message, I think I just told you the story about this one guy comes in with a pitch, and he saw me at an event, and again, he sent me an email saying, I have this pitch, and he very briefly described it. It sounded kind of interesting. I said, just come on in, show me in 20 minutes. This guy was unbelievably brilliant, and I figured he was about 25 years old. And then he said something and I thought was odd, and I said, you might be asking, how old are you? And he said, 17. And I freaked, and I just said, hold on. I called 3 of my partners, and I said, okay, guys, come here. Sit down. I'm getting out of here now. You need to spend 5 minutes. Just talk to this guy. They all came out going, oh my God, this was the smartest kid they've ever seen, we are now seriously looking at investing in this company. Funny thing, he can't even sign the deal. He has to get his mother to come and sign, which is kind of funny. Anyway, so it's great when I have the whole team who's doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lesson there is like you never know
You just don't know.
who's going to become what, and it's always good to give people a shot.
And I'm going to be likely working for somebody in this audience at some point. So when I do, you'll remember the time that I said, yes, I met with you, you rose to the top, and that's the thing that people forget, right? And that's why I say when someone doesn't respond back to you, it's because they're riding on the top.
Yeah.
But you don't ride it that long, and then all of a sudden, it flips, and then all of a sudden they start going back, oh, I wish I spoke to these various people.
Well, thank you very much for taking my phone call or email or whatever it was.
Yeah, I didn't know who the hell you were. It's like, oh,
Some
here we go again.
smart-nosed kid.
Yeah.
There you go. But I can actually give you a buzzword for what what accounting buzzword best fits my personality.
What's that?
Profitable.
All right.
When you're reviewing your investments next year, you can consider it.
I could say what my wife would say. She would say deficit.
Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. I mean, we did want to leave some time for questions. We are creeping up, so maybe what we'll do, if you're all right with it, is just take a couple from the
Sure,
audience,
yep.
and if John has a moment afterwards, maybe there will be time for more, but I don't want to keep people too long. So maybe let's just, first two hands up win. There's one. There's two, okay.
Hi, John. My name is Venus. So nice that you spoke to us about your story. It's so inspiring, and I really love it. My question is, I'm very interested in the VC side of you.
Mhm.
So, when you watching young entrepreneurs do a pitch, what are you looking for, and how do you spot a potential unicorn? Thank you.
Does everyone hear that question? Okay. Thank you. I'm going to make a reference to a seed opportunity because that's the hardest one to actually make an investment in. So the truth of the matter is 70% of what you look for is in the team. And I'm going to come back to the team question. And it could be a one founder or multiple founders. The second thing is the problem that you're trying to solve. How big is or how complex that problem is, and is it a big enough problem for a potential big enough market? Not because we're actually trying to assess the size of the market, but I still haven't seen an investment at a seed or even Series A stage that remotely looks close to what the original pitch was. So you need pivot room. And then the third thing is getting a little bit of a sense of the executable ability, and this is kind of the hard part. I really don't care what the product is or the app that you show us, but I actually want to see how you think. So having a beta version is not designed to think that that's what it's going to ultimately be, but how would they attack the problem? But now let me go backwards now and say, why is it always about the teams? At the end of the day, the product is going to change, and we're really looking to see intellectual curiosity, adaptability. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest red flags is when I ask them, why are you trying to solve this problem? You start to get the motivations. If the motivation is, this problem has been bugging me, and it's been gnawing away at me, and I don't care what I have to do to solve this problem, I will. That is something that we really look at, and really trying to look at the underlying motivation. may I say the story?
Yeah.
So people know Shopify, great success story. So what they may not know is, what was the motivation, particularly behind the CEO, Toby? He met a girl. He met a girl when he was in Germany. She was in Ottawa. They were snowboarding. He comes to Ottawa, moves away from his family to be with the girl, ends up marrying her, and he decides what he wants to do in Canada is snowboard. So him and his 3 buddies open up a snowboard shop called Red Devil. And Toby happened to take some coding classes when he was in Germany, and it was Ruby on Rails. So he actually knew a little bit. And they divided up their responsibilities, and Toby said, hey, why don't I do the website so that we could sell our products to our friends who are back in Germany or what have you. Toby goes out and says, okay, his job was to actually go look at the various software and make a decision, and found out there was no software. And unless you're a big company, you have to actually go to a web developer and pay a lot of money. He actually thought that was absolutely wrong for small and medium-sized businesses, and actually built his own site. And he builds the site, they get the friends on there, and the friends say, yeah, the snowboard was cool, but where'd you get that site from? He goes, oh, I built it. Oh, can you build one for me too? And they started saying the exact same problem. And to this day, if you hear Toby, he will still say this is about the artisans of the world trying to sell their wares, these small and medium-sized businesses. And that passion is still there now, almost 15 years later. That's where the magic really works for us.
Great, thanks. Yeah, one more.
Hi, thank you so much for your time today. So I have a very practical question.
Okay.
What advice would you have for someone that's transitioning from a CPA at a Big Four firm into institutional asset management? Because you landed in platforms, if my stalking was correct.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
How did you get the deal teams to trust you? Deal teams who has done this their entire lives, and you're a newcomer. Even though you had a name already, and you're I'm sure very well respected, but how did you really get them to trust you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you touched on a little bit. 2 things that happened. So you're absolutely right. The moment I left Deloitte, and it's kind of frustrating, I had all these accomplishments and it meant 0. Absolutely 0. No one cares. So what was step number 1? When you make your transition, you need to have the one mentor in the organization, in the one that you're transferring to provide you air cover, to give you enough time to start to build your own credibility. And I would say to you, if you can't identify that one person, not that it's impossible, but it's really hard. And by the way, this is how brutal it was. I had the CEO and his entire senior executive team wanted to kill venture right from day one. They didn't believe in it. They thought it was a lousy asset class. And I needed 3 years air cover. This was my deal. I said, cover me for 3 years, and after that, then fire me if I could improve that out. And on top of that, when I came over to do this, there was so much negative buzz by the other VCs at the time who said, well, that's ridiculous. They got an accountant to do VC work, like it's that complicated, right? And I would say, still to this day, the hardest work I've ever done is being in the accounting firm. Why is that? Because you got to sell, you got to do, you got to bill, you got to collect. It is hard, and the only thing you have is your brain and trust. That's it, and you're not selling anything. Having capital access, this is easy. It's really easy. I got to tell you. Now, so had the internal organization, except for one person, and it's good to have the CEO there covering me, my competition wanted me to fail badly, but the entrepreneurs, when I would walk in and see them, they were thrilled out of their mind, and that's what gave me the unbelievable passion. And the other thing was, because I had the experience of what made a good VC versus a bad one, etc., I was able to extract it. I made a large number of mistakes. And I would just say to you is the whole adage of failing fast, etc., hiring slow and firing fast and all those sorts of things, I really employed, but I made a lot of mistakes. But as long as you eliminated dumb risk on your mistakes and you only took the smart risk, what started to happen is when people start to realize, okay, you're being thoughtful, they start to give you a little bit of a break. But at the end of the day, you're in the asset management world, you're only as good as your return. And this is the problem with this industry. You can get away with underperformance in most other industries, not when you get evaluated based on a numerical return. That's all that matters. And what happened very quickly, my third investment was Hootsuite. Now, this was the turning point, to be honest. And I don't know what the accounting analogy would be, but I do love breaking things, and I do love going on the opposite of what everyone would otherwise do. I did something that no one ever did in Canada, and I still have kept the tweet of people thought I was an idiot. I did a 100% secondary transaction with Hootsuite on common shares for $20 million in 2012. When no one would do it for $500,000, and they wouldn't even do it on a secondary basis. And I gotta tell you, and this was our third investment too, and I figured, if I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna go out and play explosions. The guys and two of the managing directors right now were around that table, and they were more junior, and both of them actually are CPAs, Damien Steele and Sid Paquette, actually. We were around the table, not literally but figuratively, we were holding hands and basically say, guys, here's our moment here. We're either going to look like geniuses or we're going to be the biggest morons. And the VCs were trashing me, and they were just saying, oh my God, what a stupid mistake. He's skewing the market, or whatever the hell that means. All this shit. The entrepreneurs went, holy shit. And the best thing goes, Silicon Valley is now in Toronto. And that was the turning point. And then what happened is the negative folks in the organization, the blockers, et cetera, started going, oh, the market started telling our own people that this is a really good thing, and then the transition starts. But to be honest, looking back, that was a critical moment, and maybe I didn't need to do that, but remember, I had 3 years of air cover. So I did feel a little bit that the clock was going, and this was halfway, this was 18 months into the role. So I only had another 18 months left. So maybe that pressure forced me to do that.
Wow, that was a great story. I'm sure everybody really enjoyed that one. I know I certainly did, and this entire talk. John, thank you so much for coming tonight. If everybody could just give John a huge round of applause. Thank you. As a small token of thanks,
thank you
please,
much.
Here's a little gift,
Thank you,
including,
Raj.
of course, a Luminary
Luminary,
t-shirt.
yeah, I like the Luminary.
Can't get away without that. I know you won't use it on your rides. You got your Lycra suit, but that's okay. We'll get you at the gym or something. Just as a last comment from our perspective, A, thank you so much for coming, everybody. I hope that you enjoyed this evening. B, we're actually, for anybody who knows us very well, we are very, very close to our users, being you guys. We've had probably phone or in-person conversations with a whole bunch of you here, and we're now going on a new round of that. We're actually really planning out the next kind of 6 months to a year of our product roadmap, and we want to talk to CPAs. So if anybody is interested in lending a half an hour or an hour to come chat with us and maybe check out some mock-ups or fun little app designs, then please go to somebody in a Luminary shirt and tell us. So thank you very much. Yeah, that guy over there. Thank you very much again for coming, and we hope to see you at our next event. Yeah, have a good evening.
Great, thank you, thank you.